I don't see any problem in moving forward a little. It might be a little better. We were out on the lake here a week ago, and we could hear the kids talking at the north end of the lake from here. The sound was very good at that time, and I hope it's good enough today. I don't intend to make any great talk, or just do a little talk to tell you a bit about what happened here. My job with the federal government for 30-some years was to identify, to preserve, and to present the events that and the places that they happen in the important things in the history of Canada. And of course the events of 1885 are very important in the history of Canada. So I had much to do with the study and the marking of sites and the presentation of it to the public. What happened in 1885 was a result of the very hard times in the Northwest Territories, and of course this area was at that time part of the Northwest Territories of Canada. Not only the Indians, but the Métis and even the white people were agitating for improvements in the way they lived. The buffalo were gone, the fur trade had dried up, transportation was going to be terminated because they had just built a brand new railway across the west. So the livelihood of the people was pretty well gone, and even the white people had begun to say, those people in Ottawa are not going to listen to us unless we start to, they said, one white man said they would only understand bullets. Well, the bullets began to fly at Duck Lake in March of 1885 at the battle in Duck Lake. And immediately the federal government in Ottawa realized that there was trouble in the West, and it didn't take them long to get troops sent west and set up to stop the disturbance that was going on. They were quite frightened, particularly in southern, what is now Alberta, that the Blackfoot would rise up. And as probably you all know, the Blackfoot had a reputation of being very good warriors. So they had General Strange, who was a British military man, had lots of experience, ranch near Calgary, and they had General Strange raise some troops to protect the people in what is now Alberta. General Strange immediately asked for Sam Steele to be one of his major supporters to take part in his troops. And Sam Steele actually was off in the mountains. Perhaps some of you know of Fort Steele. He was looking after pretty bad disturbance going on in that area where they were laying the tracks for the railway, and Sam Steele was Northwest Mounted Policeman, of course, and he, in fact, Sam Steele had regimental number 3 with the Northwest Mounted Police. So he had been there right from the very start of the Northwest Mounted Police. But he was there. There was a riot that actually happened at the railway just before he left. In fact, Sam Steele almost died there of what they call mountain fever, and left his bed there to put down the riot. Anyway, Sam Steele gathered up what he could of his Northwest Mounted Policemen and formed what they called Steele Scouts. And these were the group that went ahead of Strange and his forces going north from Calgary up to Edmonton, and they came down the river, down the river. But in the meantime, there was bad things going on at Frog Lake. Big Bear had taken up residence, you might say, at Frog Lake. Big Bear had not been at all happy with the treaties that were being signed, and for a long time he refused to sign a treaty. He finally, because the Indians actually were starving, he did sign a treaty so he could get some support to feed the people. But he did not take a reserve. But he was there at pretty well camped. In fact, they called it his camp at Frog Lake. Well, because the Big Bear was so opposed to the treaty and the situation, a lot of the Indians actually did, the turbulent kind of element of the Indians gathered around him. Big Bear was away hunting, and when he got back, there was a lot of excitement on at Frog Lake, and but the situation was pretty well out of control there. There was the leader of these Indians at the time was Wandering Spirit, was their war chief, and anyway, on a day there in the beginning of April, Wandering Spirit actually fired the first shot at Frog Lake that killed Tom Quinn, who was the Indian agent. And as a result of that, they set about killing all of the white people there. There was one white man that did not get killed. His name was Cameron. And but all the rest of the whites there were not killed, with the exception again of the wives of a man named Gowanlock and Delaney, who were farm instructor and whatever. I can't remember what the other title was. But these wives were not killed. They were taken prisoner along with Cameron and a number of others who were mixed blood people, like Johnny Pritchard. Johnny Pritchard actually paid horses to the Indians to take these 2 white women and protect them from the Indians who actually had them as prisoners. But Johnny Pritchard had a family, and see that don't see any Sayres here today, but Rose was a daughter of John Pritchard and was 6 years old at the time. Rose married Joe Sayres, and these are relatives of Dave and Marie. Dave was here yesterday. Anyway, the Indians then moved down to Fort Pitt, and there had been a mounted police detachment at Frog Lake who had been asked to leave. The white people, Quinn and those others, had said that the presence of the mounted police actually further agitated the Indians, so they were better off without these two police. I think it was only two policemen there who couldn't protect anybody anyway with a number of Indians. So they had left and gone down to Fort Pitt, where there was a main detachment of, I think it was around about 20 Northwest Mounted policemen there at Fort Pitt. Well, the Indians moved down to Fort Pitt, and I think there was approximately somewhere between 200 and 300 Indians there, and Fort Pitt at that time was a Hudson Bay trading place, and McLean was in charge of the Hudson Bay Company trade there, and McLean went out to the Indian camp at Fort Pitt, which was a bit of a distance away, quarter of a mile or so, and thought he could persuade them not to attack Fort Pitt. Well, it so happened that he was taken prisoner, and the Indians talked him into releasing his family out of Fort Pitt. That they would protect his family and him. So that Fort Pitt was left with just the mounted police there. These policemen, Fort Pitt at that time really didn't have any palisades or anything for defense. So the little force at Fort Pitt could not really defend themselves against there. So they actually escaped in the night and floated down river. This is at the time when the ice is going out in the river. Floated down river to Battleford, where there was the main force of Northwest Mounted policemen there. The man in charge of Fort Pitt, by the way, he was Francis Dickens, who was the son of the well-known author Charles Dickens. Well, there at Fort Pitt, there were a couple of the mounted policemen had gone out to find out where the Indians were and what were the Indians doing anyway, and they went off to Frog Lake, didn't follow the trails, the known trails at all, and since they couldn't be detected, got to Frog Lake, and the place is abandoned. All they could find were dead bodies and burnt buildings. So, well, there's nothing to do there, so they headed back to Fort Pitt. Well, they followed the trail going back, and before they knew it, they ended right up in the camp of the Indians, who took after them. And you must remember the mounted police at that time rode horses. So one of the policemen was killed there, another one wounded. There was a third fellow with them, a scout with them who actually escaped and hid and so on. Well, of course, with the police gone and Fort Pitt then abandoned, the McLean and family and the rest of the employees of the Hudson Bay Company were prisoners of the Indians. The Fort Pitt is there with all their good supplies, so of course the Indians did what anybody would have done. They helped themselves. They had lots to eat then and so on. They had a pretty merry good time there. But they moved on then, the Indians did, from Fort Pitt towards Frenchman Butte. In the meantime, Strange and his force with Steele scouts were approaching from the Edmonton direction. They got to Fort Pitt, and of course they found the dead bodies. They buried the bodies, and then they went on to follow the Indians. And they finally found the Indians at Frenchman Butte. The Indians were having a powwow at the time, and of course when the military people showed up, they quickly abandoned their festivities there. They had the warrior making, saying, some of you younger people that want to be warriors, the way they did, they set a pole up and they had lines that run down almost like a maypole down, and the would-be warrior had slit cut in his breast and the muscles pulled out and pins put in there, and they danced around the pole until they could break this muscle loose. It took hours and hours of misery to do that, and that's what they were doing there at Frenchman Butte. Well, Strange finally got there. It was Steele's scouts, of course, and they attacked the Indians who had prepared rifle pits at what is now we call the battlefield of Fort Pitt. I took Sam Pritchard there to Fort Pitt. Sam at that time said he was 105 years old, but Sam was as able-bodied as almost any of you people right there at that age. He wore moccasins. Of course, he was a mixed blood person. Sam was so excited, and his memory was just so keen there. It's just like the battle that happened the day before. And, he told me stories of what had happened, and as we were driving there, and when we got there, and he finally climbed up to the ridge, and this is where the Indians had, he told me right up there, is where the Indians had made their rifle pits. And so we stopped on the trail that went to below the hill, and Sam jumped out of the vehicle before I could get out, and through the ditch and through the fence and climbed the hill up there. And yes, here's the rifle pits, he said. There were remains there. And he walked along a little piece, and he says, right there is the only one that I saw get wounded. A bullet hit the dirt in front of his rifle pit, and a stone fell up and cut his cheek. That was almost the extent of the injuries at Frenchman Butte. Anyway, at Frenchman Butte, what happened, they fired away at each other for quite a while. The troops were down in the valley. The Indians certainly had the advantage there. And of course, there were more injuries than what Sam had said. But finally, nothing really was happening, and they both started to move, Indians along the ridge and the troops along the side, and both of them got the impression there's far more enemy than what there really was, because they didn't realize that these same people that had been over there were moving along there. So finally both retreated. That was the Battle of Frenchman Butte. Well, in the meantime, over in Saskatchewan, what's now Saskatchewan area, on the South Saskatchewan River, General Middleton had arrived by train, of course, and had there was a battle at Fish Creek, and then they moved up to Batoche, and there was a battle of Batoche, of course, and the Métis there was Gabriel Dumont leading them, were what they call defeated, and so Middleton was free then to come west to Battleford, where Poundmaker, well, I should have said too that General Otter had come from the railway south from Regina way to Battleford up to Poundmaker. The natives there had caused a number of things, of course robbing some of the local settlers. They killed a few people. One Northwest Mounted policeman was caught out when he was scouting, and the Indian was a little bit faster than the fellow's name was Elliott. He, of course, was on horseback, and the Indian was on horseback, and Elliott was killed there south of Battleford. A few other things like that. General Otter had gotten to Battleford and had taken initiative and thought he was going to teach the Indians, Poundmaker's band out west of Battleford. So he marched out there, and there was a battle at Cut Knife Hill. It was rather tragic that the Northwest Mounted policeman, Slade, who had been at Frog Lake, who had to evacuate Fort Pitt, and of course ended up at Battleford, and Slade was killed at Cut Knife Hill. Anyway, Otter had to retreat. The Indians actually defeated Otter at Cut Knife Hill. But Middleton went down to Battleford. Well, Poundmaker had come into Battleford and so-called surrendered there, and he was taken prisoner there at Battleford, and was greatly upset because he had come willingly into Battleford. You must remember too, I should have mentioned, back at Frog Lake, Big Bear ran around shouting, "Stop, stop." The shooting started there. Poundmaker had been the same. When Otter's troops retreated from Cut Knife Hill, the Indians wanted to follow, and he could have slaughtered Otter's troops, and Poundmaker stopped them. So anyway, Middleton came up and joined with Spring at Frenchman Butte. Of course, the Indians had left Frenchman Butte and had headed this way, coming north. Actually, realized by this time they were out. The Métis had fallen at Batoche. Poundmaker was captive or had surrendered there at Battleford, and the Indians had no hope actually continuing, and they were just more or less escaping from the troops that were coming. By this time, of course, there's a pretty big force of all the troops from eastern Canada, from Winnipeg, and General Strange coming from this other direction. They all met down here at south of Frenchman Butte. Actually, Middleton's troops had come by steamboat on the river there to what's now Fish Creek area. Some of you crossed the ferry there, I'm sure, many times. And they'd all joined forces and were coming then, following Big Bear up here. Sam Steele's scouts, of course, were in the lead. And not too far on the way, they, Sam and one trooper were leading the scouts there. There's about 60 members only there. Most of them were Northwest Mounted Police with a lot of experience. And there was one of the natives, Mamioke, I think his name was, decided that he was going to be a real hero, and he charged on his horse at Sam Steele. I could have said earlier, General Strange, when Sam Steele showed up in his red tunic, Strange said it might be better if you changed to the brown garb rather than that red tunic. It was pretty attractive, he said, and Sam Steele refused because he was very proud of being a Northwest Mounted Police. So he insisted on keeping the red tunics. Anyway, this Indian charged down, intending to shoot Sam Steele. His buddy beside him went ahead and shot the Indian. And actually they exchanged shots, and this fellow got shot in the elbow, actually. He was a little better shot, I guess, than the Indian was. But the Indian actually died down the trail back here. Well, finally, in the morning, the plaque here gives the date and so on. You can read it later. They caught up to the Indians who were camped right here. Maybe there was a tent sitting right where you're sitting right now. But of course, they, as soon as they found out each other, shots started to fly again, and a number of Indians were killed. There was Sergeant Fleury was shot in the chest, and of course he died. And there were a few other wounded. There were a number of Indians killed, and they actually, of course, at that time, it was just water here in what we call the Narrows. And the trail, people that followed the trail came in from the west, went right through where the bridge is now, and then it followed on the east shore of this what we call Upper Racon now, and went on and circled around to Green Lake and so on. The Indians, of course, tried to get out of the way. Remember, the Indians have the prisoners, with them, including the two white women and Pritchard and all of these people are prisoners. The Indians have their wives and children along with them too, and they're all trying to escape across this channel of water here. Mixed in with the Indians are all these prisoners. Kitty McLean, remember McLean was the Hudson Bay Company man. Kitty McLean was carrying her baby sibling, actually a little girl, in her arms, and she felt a bullet go past her face. Another bullet went right through the shawl between herself and the baby, but they got across. Anyway, the Indians then went on up that shore and around. When I came here, there was a fellow named Art Stabler. Maybe you've heard that name. Anybody heard that name? Stabler Campground is named after Art Stabler. But Art Stabler and a friend of his, Gene Companion, did a lot of historical research in the area. Art was a very great supporter of Loon Lake area. But they did a lot of consulting Indians and so on. And I'm not sure if they're still here or not. There were a number of white pillars that Art Stabler and Gene set up around here where Indians had said that's where certain ones of their band had been killed. I think they had identified 5 spots where Indians had been killed. There was just Flurry and I don't remember for sure, but there were a couple of other wounded of the mounted police there. Now, Art Stabler took me up to the island, up at the north end of this lake. I don't know how many of you have traveled the lake, and you know that on the north end there is an island. Art was pretty sure that the Indians had prepared another battleground to defend themselves on the top of that island. There were pits there, holes in the ground. I was not sure from the look of them whether they were actual rifle pits or they could have been where trees, you know how when a tree falls over, the spruce pine trees or whatever, they pull up a lot of dirt with it if they're blown over. And I thought it could have been pits left from the roots of fallen trees. Anyway, the Indians did go on, and they did prepare another battlefield up near Pine Cove on Loon Lake, on the big lake there. And there are the holes there of this other battleground. However, Sam Steele had followed the Indians, and so did General Middleton with the troops. Went around, they crossed here at the Narrows, and they went up to the other end. And the trail went through quite a wide, marshy area. Any of you who have fished up there, you maybe know that marshy area up at the end. Well, Middleton looked at that and said that he wasn't going to take his troops through there. Sam Steele was so terribly upset. They had the advantage of the Indians. They could have captured whoever they wanted, and Middleton refused to go on. And of course, Middleton was commanding, so he ordered Steele to give up the chase too, which then And that really was the end of what happened here at Steele Narrows as far as battle time went. Middleton called it in his report an impregnable morass. In other words, he couldn't get through this marshy area with his troops. The Indians got through with all of their kids and women and so on, but Middleton couldn't with his troops. When I came here, and it was my responsibility to get this place marked in the preservation of the site, I arrived here, and on this hill I saw a bunch of little holes in the ground. I heard that the government of Saskatchewan was going to rebuild the old trail into a road here. And I looked at these holes and said, oh, these guys are soil testing. This hill is planned to go into that fill there, which is going to change the whole environment here. If this hill's gone, I wanted the hill for a viewpoint here. So I contacted the authorities in Saskatchewan and said, you got to preserve this site. Well, it happened that I stopped for a meal in St. Walburg and went in, and there were a couple of guys sitting at a table. One of them I knew, who was a local fellow. The other fellow I didn't know at all, and the fellow I knew introduced me to this other guy that was sitting at the table as I had joined to eat my meal. And this fellow looked at me. You cost me, I don't remember how many, $1,000. I thought, what? And he was the engineer in charge of this road that was going through. And sure enough, he planned to move this dirt into that fill. Well, of course, they had, when the government stopped the removal of the hill, they had to haul all this fill in then. So I cost them a lot of money, but we saved the hill. My idea here was that the stairs should kind of circle to make it an easy climb, and then there'd be a bench where old people or tired people could rest, and then it would go back the other way and zigzag back and forth up the hill with a bench at each junction there. However, the guys didn't follow my plan. It goes straight up now. So if anybody that's able-bodied should climb the hill and see the viewpoint. I don't know what it's like. I haven't climbed the hill myself, whether the growth allows now, but you could see the lake on that side, you could see the lake, you could see up to the impregnable morass, and so on. I'm not sure if you can do that now. In fact, you could even see these white pillars at one time. There was no growth here. The federal plaque that I carried myself right to that spot is right behind me here, that has a little message about what happened here. But that's part of the presentation to you, is this now viewpoint up there and the plaque behind me here. There used to be, I can't say what there are actually, but there used to be interpretive signs up there, and I hope they're still there, that tell you about it. So ends my talk. If you want to ask a question, I'll try to answer. Do you want to hear about Rose Pritchard? Rose Pritchard told me about Frog Lake. Rose was 6 years old, and Sam also told me this. I'll put the stories together. Sam was running toward their log cabin to take shelter from the Indians who were killing people. And behind Sam there was a fellow named Goon that was fur trading on his own, actually, there at Frog Lake, or at least trading. And Sam got through the door into the cabin. Goon was shot and fell, Rose told me, right in the doorway. They couldn't close the door. She said when Goon fell, he was wearing a tam that was, and she said it rolled like a plate across the floor there. And there he was in the door, and they couldn't close it. And they finally pushed him back out of the doorway and got the door closed and barred. So I asked Sam what would have happened if Goon had been the faster runner. And Sam just shrugged and said, I guess I'd be dead. But in the getting the information for these stories, I was able to talk with the people that had been involved at Batoche. A fellow told me about the cannon. He was on the west side of the river. Batoche was a settlement on both sides of the river, and this old fellow was on the west side of the river. The activity was on the east side of the river, and General Middleton was firing there on both of the rifles, but with cannon. And this fellow says he was a boy at that time. He said it was exciting, lots of fun there. And these shells would come, and these were 9-pounder shells. They're about this long, and they're filled with explosive, with the idea they're supposed to explode when they hit, so this, as a boy, he said, he'd just swish in the air, and it hit the dirt, the cannon there. He said, we ran and would dig them out, and he says, oh, they were hot. I always wondered, were these, was that normal with these bullets? These are 3 inches around and about a foot long. Would they be hot? I don't know. But that's what he said anyway. But he said, as a boy, it was exciting. He went and dug out these shells when they landed. They didn't explode for some reason. But I had lots of experiences like that. Teacher, interested in history.
Yeah.
I did a lot of studying.
So did you go and hire some university students, some history majors?
One of my early activities was trying to get some professionalism into the organization.
Some history majors.
Even in Ottawa, there was no actual professional historian. The head of the historic sites in Ottawa was an ex-colonel.
What?
A colonel.
Oh, okay.
Military man.
Yeah.
And that's the way the whole thing was. There was no archaeologists or no historians or nobody knew how to restore a building. And the preservation of the historic resources, it was criminal really what was going on. I did my own archaeology at Fort Battlefield to determine where the stockade went. And I did research to know what the stockade would look at.
Yeah, there was old pictures though.
But
one thing that you might
the trouble was those pictures were hid away.
Oh, you didn't find them?
Captain Peters came out with a camera. He was the artilleryman.
And he took them back with him?
And he kept these. I went to Ottawa one time, and they treated me like an oddity. I came from that strange area way out west there. And finally a young guy came from, hey, we've got a box of stuff here. It's, I think from the west, got something to do with the west. But we don't own it in the archives, he says. It's here for safekeeping. It's still owned by the family. And he brings this cardboard box about this big and this deep. I opens up and holy shit. Here's all of Captain Peters' photographs there. And I indeed caught those things. There's a treasure there that everybody ought to be able to have access to.
Well, yes.
So I came back to Calgary and went to the Glenbow Foundation to my friend there, Hugh Dempsey. And told Hugh Dempsey about this. Of course, at that time, Glenbow's got wads of money to spend, anxious to spend it on anything. And right away, Hugh went and arranged for those photographs to be available. And now you can buy a book that's got a good number of those.
Well, I had a book that Hugh Dempsey wrote.
Well, he wrote quite a number of things. One on Big Bear. One of the best things on Big Bear written by Hugh Dempsey. He's still alive, by the way.
He must be a few years on him, too.
Yeah.
Lives in Calgary?
Yeah. Yeah, I was at the archives, Glenbow Archives there. I guess it's about a year ago when he was alive. They told me that he shows up once in a while. Still.